This episode of GenreVision is brought to you by our premium subscribers at patreon.com/GenreVision. For $5 a month, our premium subscribers get access to an ever-growing library of exclusive bonus content, including weekly pre-show recordings, peeks behind the scenes, and a big currently consuming session every month. Sign up at patreon.com/GenreVision.
Greetings, loyal listeners and new recruits. I'm Drew Dietsch.
I'm Travis Newton.
And this is GenreVision. Every week, Travis and I review and recommend horror films, action movies, fantasy flicks, sci-fi cinema, and more. And we are continuing our John Lithgow-themed month, Lithgoing, Lithgone, with Brian De Palma's Raising Cain.
The director's cut.
Yes, we'll talk a little bit about the different cuts, but we are going to be talking about the director's cut of this. But first, just a quick call to action. If you love what we're doing here on GenreVision, please rate and review the show on the Apple Podcast Store. It is something that we can always use more of, especially right now, because we haven't gotten reviews for a while, and that affects our ranking and the ability for the show to find new listeners. And it's a really, really crucial way to help the show out. And if you do leave a written review, we will feature it here on the show.
Absolutely. If it wasn't that important, we wouldn't ask about it every week. So please, you can go to iTunes on your PC. You can open up Apple Podcasts on your Mac or your iOS device and leave us a rating and a review there.
So continuing Lithgoing, Lithgone month with Raising Cain, we're definitely trying to look for movies that we thought highlighted and featured John Lithgow, not just a supporting performance that, we could kind of zero in on, because we had requests to do something like Blowout, which is a movie both Travis and I have seen and which both Travis and I very much like.
Fantastic. Love it. It's incredible.
Yeah. Incredible movie. And John Lithgow's in that, and he's great and spooky, but he's a very minor character.
Yes.
We absolutely 100% recommend watching Blowout, and he is fantastic in it, but it wasn't quite enough to shine the spotlight on him. So we decided to do a movie that he did with Brian De Palma, where he got to be the lead role, and that's Raising Cain. And this is one of those movies that I will always remember before ever even knowing what it was about, because it was a video store staple, a cover that I can remember seeing all the time.
Yeah, well, it had a really striking poster art and key art. And on that poster, you have John Lithgow's face split, and one side of him is in photo negative. And most of the artwork, whether it be video artwork or poster artwork, had two really striking taglines. The first one is demented, deranged, deceptive, De Palma, which is A+ tagline.
Nobody's going to use a tagline theming in the director's name anymore. So.
Well, now it's a Brian De Palma film. Raising Cain is underneath it. So, they were selling it on De Palma's name, which I think is lovely. The other tagline is, when Jenny cheated on her husband, he didn't just leave, he split, which is a great tagline that actually doesn't really accurately describe what's going on in the movie, but it's something that the movie tries to present as something that could be going on. Let's talk about the director's cut for a moment here. This was kind of an interesting story.
Yeah, this was only recently kind of brought into existence, this idea of a director's cut, because it was actually a fan cut by another film director by the name of Pete Gilderblom, and found the original script and re-edited the movie to closely resemble the original script, which changed the order and the revelation of some pretty big things in the movie. And De Palma somehow came across this particular edit and liked it enough so that when they were doing the collector's edition Blu-ray release, I think that's a Scream Factory or Shout Factory release.
I believe so, yeah.
That he gave the okay to include this cut and label it as the director's cut, which is interesting because technically it is a director's cut, just not the director of the actual movie. Yeah. but he okayed it, and this was the version that we decided to watch. And without we're going to be spoiler friendly with this, since it's not a new release or anything. But I will say that in the director's cut, there is a decision to hide what's going on with one of the characters, the main, I won't say necessarily main character, but certainly one of the main characters. And that is Carter Nix, played by John Lithgow.
Right. Instead, instead of going from his perspective first, what the director's cut does is recut almost the entire first act, restructure, remove scenes around to be almost completely from his wife's perspective. The wife is named Jenny, and she, I believe, is I believe she's an oncologist, some sort of medical doctor. Mm-hmm. And the opening scene of this cut is a scene in which they walk into a musical clock store, which is kind of odd. I expected the musical clock thing to come back a little bit more later on in the movie, because the first scene really spends a lot of time focusing on that symbolism.
Well, it does. It's for a big plot device, and it's also a conduit for Pino Donaggio to stick in a spooky, creepy music box theme.
This is killer work from composer Pino Donaggio. I asked you during the opening credits before his credit came up, I'm like, this is a Pino Donaggio joint, is it? And you're like, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so it's it's going to be good, and this is, when De Palma made this, there was a fear that he would be seen as kind of reverting back to what he knew and kind of his safety, which are these very classically Hitchcock suspense thrillers. Mm. The thing is, when De Palma does those, 9 times out of 10, they're really good. He's really good at doing these. And one of those is getting somebody like Pino Donaggio, who is able to, craft his own sense of personality, but is also not afraid to go full Bernard Herrmann when the moment calls for it.
Yeah, I mean, Donaggio's scores are really a great fit for what De Palma does as a director. It really is a match made in heaven. So, unlike some of Hitchcock's thrillers, which eventually gained a huge amount of scale, to the point where characters are hanging off the sides of buildings and off Mount Rushmore and so on. Raising Cain is a very small movie. It actually, a lot of the time, feels like the scale of a TV film, and the tone and the subject matter make it feel like a very specific kind of TV film. That's a Lifetime movie. It is the kind of like pulpiest, dreamiest, most Italian Lifetime movie I think I've ever seen.
Yeah, I mean, when we were screening, I said, Lifetime movies owe an enormous debt to Brian De Palma.
Yeah.
And this sort of feels like him stepping into that arena again, for a theatrically released film, but the kinds of movies that he had made had changed into something else. And he kind of was like, okay, well, I'm going to do my riff on that, which is really a riff on what I was originally doing. So it's this weird sense of progression. But when you talk about there is this very particular dreaminess to Raising Cain. And I think it's a big reason why the movie, in its theatrical cut as well, potentially turned off a lot of people, because this is a movie where you will have very stereotypical moments, like characters seeming to have dreams within dreams, which is, for the most part, often looked at as being, that's really hacky, that's really stupid, yada, yada, yada. And I think the reason that kind of story approach has that reputation is because a lot of people don't exactly know how best to weave that into the tone of their piece. Mm-hmm. Now, I think De Palma is really good at that overall in his career, but especially here in Raising Cain, the dreaminess makes the whole movie feel like a nonstop nightmare.
Yeah, it's kind of disconnected. I keep coming back to that Comfortably Numb lyric, the Pink Floyd lyric, and Comfortably Numb. My hands felt just like two balloons, where you're just, fever dreamed. And, kind of disconnected, like almost kind of that feeling you have when you take a antihistamine and for the whole day you're kind of like, what? What's going on? That is the primary sort of tone and feeling I got from Raising Cain, because even though this is a suspense thriller, there is really no attempt, at least in this director's cut, and and I read similar criticisms of the theatrical cut as well, but like no attempt to like really hold itself to a concrete timeline or diegesis. A diegesis is the movie's version of reality. It's what the characters are experiencing in the moment as far as sight and sound and, the things that are really happening to them. Also, because you're dealing with a movie that has, mental illness as a significant element, there's a whole lot of like, well, did that really happen? Or is he just crazy? There's a lot of that works its way into the plot as well. But this first act is so unconventional in that after it gets the sort of mundane setup of like, this is, Jenny Nix and her doctor husband Carter and their little daughter, and he takes a special interest in her because he's a child psychologist and all this sort of stuff. And after you introduce the old boyfriend that comes into the scene and what his history was with Jenny, then things start to get a lot more disconnected, and they start doing things a little bit out of sequence. They'll jump around in time a little bit. They'll jump around through dreams inside of dreams. And after a while, you just have to accept with this movie that it's never going to meet our typical needs as far as clarity goes. It is confusing. I think it is a confusing movie. I read criticism of it, but from popular critics back when the theatrical release came out, and they called it confusing. And I don't think the director's cut has solved that particular problem, if it is a problem at all.
I was going to say, I don't see it as, because if you were to sit here and to have me like very basic plot read out what happened in Raising Cain, I feel very confident I could do that.
Sure.
Like I could tell you how it, the big beats go down, but it is a matter of time. And when I say time, I mean the movie's fluid grasp of time, because it is jumping around, like you're saying, in the timeline of events and the, at times when it's like, oh, we find out that we're in a character's dream and they wake up and then an event starts happening to them. And it turns out that that's also a dream. Was it a total dream, or was part of what they experienced real and part of it a dream? I think the issue that people can have with that is that the diegesis of the movie doesn't have anything to indicate that is going to be a huge part of the experience. When you have movies like Inception, I'll just go because that's an easy one that everybody knows and will understand. Inception has so much instruction manual stuff to tell you about how its dream narrative is going to work, that even if you don't 100% know what's going on in a movie like that, you feel that the movie knows what's going on.
Yeah. It actually cuts things together in a way that makes you feel like, is like confident. But with this one, I won't say that the filmmaking lacks confidence. Instead, what it distinctly lacks is just clarity. There's sometimes in the plot, I think 2 or 3 times, a character says that something happened, and my immediate feeling was not to trust it, because I was like, were we shown a scene of that happening? And if there was a scene of that happening or it being mentioned, like whose perspective was the scene from? And we come to find out that things get even more complicated with Carter Nix, because Carter Nix has, movie mental illness. It's basically kind of what people used to think schizophrenia was, what laypersons used to think schizophrenia was, which was split personality. We now know that schizophrenia is not a multiple personality or, kind of disorder. Schizophrenia, people may experience hallucinations, and Carter certainly does experience hallucinatory events, people talking to him, not being able to trust what he sees, things like that.
Yeah, and there is a deliberateness to that in this, because there will be reveals that the movie wants to make, and it's using certain elements of Carter's perspective to twist our belief in what we're seeing. This is a movie where a character has multiple personalities and will converse with his multiple personalities as manifestations that, to himself.
There's a particular scene between Lithgow dressed as one certain character in old age stipple makeup. We later find out that this is not an additional personality, but just another character played by Lithgow, as if things didn't need to be any more confusing. But he's talking to the Cain personality, which is the villainous personality.
Yes, I mean, it does things like that, and then it will also have these stranger moments, like when the Cain personality is in the midst of taking care of a murder and trying to set up the boyfriend character played by Stephen Bauer, whose name is Jack. He's going to murder this woman and set it up so it looks like Jack is the one that did it. And during this, a little boy walks out of a bathroom and starts talking in a strange voice saying, like, I'm going to tell on you.
A man's voice, yeah.
Yes. And you had said, it's like, what is going on? This feels like a David Lynch moment.
Yeah.
And the moment happens and you're like, oh, okay, what was that? And then eventually it comes up later. It's like, oh, okay, this is another personality that manifested itself. I think in that regard, I think the movie explains everything it needs to.
Sure.
I think that's why I say, like, if you asked me to say what went down, I could tell you what went down, but it is more of a overall mood that I think creates this aura of unease and uncertainty throughout pretty much the whole running time.
Yeah. And the simple setup wants you to think here, like, okay, we have this child psychologist with severe mental illness that finds out his wife is cheating on him. And so you think, well, is it going to be a revenge plot? Is he going to murder the wife? Is he going to murder the boyfriend? And he does neither. Instead, his real motivations throughout the film don't really become elucidated until later. And it's almost something that's separate from the affair. The affair at sometimes is almost incidental. They do position the affair as kind of a mental breaking point for Carter, but it actually, in retrospect may not be, because there's this whole other plot going on that we won't, we'll get into a little bit later. There is a sort of revenge attempt when the Cain personality kills a woman. I think she may have been a patient at one time, or it's just a friend or a neighbor of the Nix family.
Yeah, there's this playground that is the central hub for a lot of the story. And I know De Palma says, like, the kind of kickoff to the idea was like, what if I did one of these thrillers where a playground was the setting, like was the main hub of what kicks off the story. And so it seems to be like other friends that are also parents that, either they go to similar schools or they hang out in the same social circles. But they clearly, Carter has some kind of familiarity with this woman. If she's just, like a playground friend, and in the original theatrical cut, it was this kind of sequence that kicked off the movie, which was him talking to her about child psychology and his father being this very famous child psychologist who was trying to do experiments with very young kids to figure out how personalities develop and all of this. And he ends up having to incapacitate this woman. And in the midst of doing so, his other personality, Cain, shows up. And it is, we're going to talk about John Lithgow quite a bit because that's our theme month. And also this is our most Lithgow that we've gotten this month in terms of putting him front and center and letting him go, because if nothing else, Raising Cain should be heralded for letting John Lithgow go.
He really does. After this first act in the director's cut, which is really all centered around the wife's perspective, we then get the perspective shift over to Lithgow's character, Dr. Nix. And, we see events that had already played out before in the first act play out from his perspective. And then, the plot continues. So he attempts to frame the boyfriend, Jack, by putting a dead body in his trunk. And he takes a little bit of the body's dress and sort of sticks it out and gives it a yank to make sure that it's hanging out of the trunk just enough for the cops to find it. He does attempt to murder his wife, Amy, by putting her in a car and driving the car into a river, or it's not a river, but it's, some kind of body of water, a lake or something.
Very direct Psycho reference.
Yeah, the way that shot is framed. Yeah. One of the things that I love about this is that they're very cavalier about having Lithgow play against himself in a scene, but they don't employ a whole lot of visual elements, like as far as trickery. Like, he doesn't often share the frame with himself. Well, maybe never, actually.
I mean, I don't think so.
I can't think of a single split screen shot where like he's on one side of the frame and another one of his characters is on another side of the frame.
No.
So they don't really do all that kind of stuff. Maybe De Palma didn't want to worry about doing that kind of stuff. But, you do get the sense that he is playing against himself in the scene. There's one scene in a car where we first meet Cain. And Cain leans in through the passenger side window, and he's got these very signature glasses on, these sunglasses that are just very, very good costuming choice. And he's, puffing on a cigarette. And we have a scene where Carter and Cain are working together. It's immediately apparent that Cain has something else going on, some other sinister thing that he's doing. There are two kids in the back of the car, and he has just drugged this family friend who was driving the car. He blows some kind of dirt into her eyes and distracts her and causes her to run off the road. And
which is wonderfully set up with his fake sneezing.
Yeah, nobody ever sneezes in movies, so immediately you're like, what is he doing? This movie is full of little strange moments like that. Like, whoa, why would this character do that? So I do like and admire that De Palma made a lot of specific choices in this movie that would come across as strange.
I mean, in that regard, I want to champion the moments of horror in this movie because there are some phenomenal scares.
Sure. One
of them being when we get the flashback to how Jenny, played by Lolita Davidovich, and Stephen Bauer, Jack, how they met was that Jack had his wife was in basically like intensive care. She's movie dying in a hospital.
Yes.
And that Jenny was there kind of comforting him. And on New Year's Eve, they were watching the ball drop together and they kissed and realized like, oh, there's this deep passion between us. And they're doing this right next to Jack's wife's deathbed in the hospital.
It feels very TV soap opera. And I think that's intentional.
Oh yeah. No, this is classic pulp sleaze in terms of the writing of it, but it's being filtered through this modern lens of soap opera and Lifetime and everything. And so this is going on. You're like, the wife's right there. Geez. And then we see from Jack's perspective, he looks back at his wife and there is this wonderful snap cuts of a zoom to the wife suddenly being, her eyes are wide open and looking directly at him. And it turns out that she's died. It's like, ooh, that is so spooky.
Yeah, there's some similar kind of, they call those axial cuts where they'll cut closer and closer and closer and they'll do it really rapidly. There's a series of those in this movie that De Palma does that like nobody else out there. He's just so good at doing those kinds of things.
They're great. I mean, every time he has to make a big reveal, especially for a face, it works. There is a terrifying, again, like almost like that moment with the wife in the hospital is, you could set that up as the beginning of a ghost haunting story. It's the way that it plays out.
Yeah. Well, it reminds me of that one Nightmare from American Werewolf in London,
right?
Where Jack finds himself sleeping in the hospital bed and then opens his eyes and his mouth to reveal the monster eyes and the monster teeth, which is an incredible scene. But there are more nightmares that kind of set up. There's an almost like Final Destination-esque sense of like destiny and fate and death looming in this movie. There's a dream early on in the first act where the wife is dreaming that she's driving around and she's in a car accident and there's a statue nearby with like a big, I don't know, a lance or some sort of spear, and it punches through the windshield. And I think it's at that point that she wakes up, like she has a nightmare about being impaled, and she may wake up right into another nightmare. I can't remember exactly. And this, of course, kind of has echoes in the way that the climax plays out as well, because the whole climax is like a weird Final Destination sequence where there's like so many things.
But that's a very De Palma thing. Like he loves, watching. He loves making you watch as the dominoes get set up, and it's like, okay, I don't know exactly how this is going to fall, but he is so much about like, I'm going to take you through. It's one of the reasons why he was so good to do something like Mission Impossible, because the idea of executing a heist is like speaks to that particular skill set in filmmaking. Is like, okay, I'm going to show you every step of the way what we have to do and set up to get to this point. But in a movie like Raising Cain, it is more about like, I don't know what you're setting us up for.
Right. But he specifically calls your attention to certain things. Like there's a bunch of guys speaking Spanish and clearly like drunk, and you're thinking like, okay, he's calling attention to this. This is going to be a crucial ingredient in some kind of stew he's cooking up for the climax. Mm-hmm. And then he'll call your attention to something else. And he's not doing it in ways that seem like really overt or obvious or like painfully like, listen, you need to pay attention to this. But okay, this is information I need to retain on some level because it's going to play into, how this climax is set up. And
well, and it's, again, I think it's one of the reasons why he's a phenomenal horror director, is because he knows how to take advantage of setting up images and getting the audience to invest in a particular image so that he can then subvert that image for horror. For example, the wife in the hospital, every time we see her head's to the side, she looks completely, he's not even treating her like she's there most of the time. So then he can subvert that. So when that jump happens and we see her face wide-eyed looking directly into the camera, it's a shock. Another one is there is this camera that Carter has set up in his daughter's bedroom.
Oh, great scare.
To view her as she sleeps and monitor her progress and all this stuff. And the shot will start with Carter has dumped his wife Jenny in the pond in the car. He thinks she's dead, and so he's come back to his house, and we hear him off screen talking on the phone to his father, which we're like, okay, that's his other personality. But we hold on this shot of the camera, the television that's showing the feed inside the daughter's room, and she's not in there. Bedroom's totally empty and everything. And Carter eventually gets off the phone, does something else. He comes back to the TV and is doing something with it and changes back to the feed. And all of a sudden, boom, Jenny is there in the corner looking like Sadako from The Ring. Yeah,
all soaking wet and hair in her face. It's a really great scare. Fantastic setup. Love the way that De Palma pulls it off. There's also a lot of kind of campier pulp elements in the film that I found, to be very welcome, but they don't they certainly don't make the movie any less confusing. Like with the cops, they bring in this other psychological expert who worked with Carter Nix's dad on writing some book called Raising Cain, which is about the development of multiple personalities in childhood. And she's played by Frances Sternhagen.
You're goddamn right she is. So good.
So good. Yeah, she's very, very great in this role. They do a long take walk and talk with her character that is probably my favorite shot in the movie. They give her this wig. I think she's undergoing cancer treatments. I think that's the reason they give for her having a wig. But really the only reason that they need Frances Sternhagen's character to wear a wig is so that John Lithgow's character can steal it and going into the third act. Yeah, he snatches her wig. And they call attention to the fact that it's a wig because she says like, "Oh, this damn wig! They should have given me a gray one. My hair is gray."
Yeah, I mean, well, because when she came on immediately, you were like, "Oh my god, that wig is a choice."
That is a wiggy wig.
Yeah, and it's like, don't worry. Yes, like it is a deliberate choice, and they will explain to you why.
Yeah, they wanted me to notice it was a wig, so they did their job. De Palma is great about telling us which details to notice, but I feel like he was distinctly going for a dreamlike vibe here of not being able to trust reality. And that does, I think, overall contribute to a level of confusion where I just had to realize early on I couldn't depend on this to give me the clarity that I wanted as far as plot beats. Like, yes, there are general plot beats I know that happen because they have to be confirmed later in the film. Like, yes, they did happen. Like, Jenny escaping from the car, for instance. After we see her drowning in the car, the kind of visual language that we see at that scene really gives it a sense of finality. and he wants us to distrust that. So then when she comes back later, he doesn't frame it as like her clawing her way out of the car, like the bride crawling out of the grave in Kill Bill Volume 2. Like, he doesn't film it that way. She's just like out, done. It's like, what's she did she get out? Like, what's she doing here?
I think one of the big influences on this movie is particularly giallo movies. And when I say I mean like very specifically Argento giallos, like Deep Red.
Oh yeah.
Where like I mean, it's not my shelf pick, but I think Deep Red's a great shelf pick for this because it has a similar like, what's actually going on here? Deep Red, like Raising Cain, if you were to say play the plot beats out very simply, you could do it. But I think that does a disservice to the actual experience of a movie like Deep Red or Raising Cain, where it's like, yeah, no, things will at the end of everything make enough sense, but the journey to get there is going to be weird. And Deep Red does this, I think, to exceptional effect. And I think Raising Cain does too, but it is a very antagonistic choice. And I think that is just by design going to confuse or turn off some people.
You know, when I think of De Palma, I think of he shoots with a lot of long lenses in his exteriors, especially, and it kind of gives a voyeuristic feel, like we're getting off on watching them from afar. But there's one scene in this movie that really breaks tradition, I think, for him, and does these super wide angles, and it's a scene between Lithgow and himself playing Cain and, surprise, surprise, Carter's dad, the psychologist who faked his own death. And we don't know it at this point. We actually think that it's just another personality inside Carter Nix's head. But him playing this like Norwegian character with this thick Norwegian accent, which initially comes across as like very phony. Like, what is this? But I think it's leaning into how silly it's being. Again, and I'm okay with that. I think there is some humor to be found in, the old Dr. Nix performance. But that scene where it cuts back and forth between these really super uncomfortable, almost like fisheye lens angles on Dr. Nix and Cain is like, oh, wow, this is... It felt like a scene from Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. It was set in a dim hotel interior, for one. It had these really rich reds on the wallpaper. Very oppressive, very hellish.
Yeah, well, it adds to the deliberate choice of trying to distort the presentation of reality.
Right. It makes you think, like, is this happening in any sort of diegetic location, or is this only happening in a character's mind?
Right. And I think that is why part of the reason he wants to pull the twist at the end being like, no, actually, Dr. Nix is alive. It wasn't another personality, is because every time we see him up to then, it is only in this hotel room and it is only through these very wide angle lenses in close quarters. So it's like, oh, well, the presentation of this character has been warped the entire time. So I assumed it fit into the whole warped diegesis of what we were experiencing. But then, that was clearly a deliberate choice to be like, oh no. So that way, when it's revealed that that Carter's father is alive, it's, I can't say it's like an amazing twist or anything, but it does the work to get there.
So I think what solidifies my take on the film is a scene that happens just after the halfway point, where Jenny she escapes from the car and they all go to the cops. And the cops, one is played by Greg Henry, who you might recognize as the mayor from Slither. One of them mentions like this whole case that's going on. There's like a motiveless murder involved. It's a detective's dream, he says. And I thought, that's the movie talking about itself. Like, it really does feel like someone trying to set up a murder plot in a very dreamlike space. That to me is the film's essence distilled.
Well, that huge sequence is so Psycho derived for me. And it's derived from the part that everybody hates about Psycho, which is the ending where a doctor has to come in and just point blank explain everything that's going on to the audience.
Right.
And that is like this sequence where it's like, all right, well, Carter is actually, the subject of these experiments that his father put on him to create these different personalities. And Francis Sternhagen's character, Dr. Waldheim, is realizing like, oh yes, that's who this Cain subject was that I was never allowed to meet. He did these experiments to his own son. She eventually wants to have a conversation with Carter or whatever personalities will reveal themselves to her. And we get what I think is like the reason to make the movie on paper is like, oh, you're going to get, John Lithgow doing different characters. And so, in this, he gets to, play a character called Josh, who's a little boy who's scared. And it turns out, oh, that was the little boy personality that we saw earlier that was trying to, yell at Cain for being naughty or whatever. But you get to see John Lithgow in all of his glorious earnestness, like trying to play these parts. And it's wonderful. Like it's ham and it's knowingly ham. And in that way, to me, it doesn't come off as camp. Like it's not spoofing itself, but it knows how bold it is.
Sure. But it's not funny.
Well, that's why I say ham instead of camp. Like it knows that it's being hammy, that this is a character as written, that if you did the subtle version, like the subtle version of this is like Edward Norton in Primal Fear. And it's like, yeah, as much love as that movie gets, it's not nearly as interesting or engaging to me as allowing somebody like Lithgow to do something like this.
Yeah.
For example, there's another personality, Margot, this feminine personality who we haven't met. And during this interview session with Dr. Waldheim, John Lithgow is in the Josh personality, and there's this great over-the-shoulder shot looking at him. And as Josh, he's talking about like, Margot's going to get mad, and he looks like almost directly into the camera and like, she's here, she's right behind you. Like, don't look. And I'm like, this is amazing horror. Like it's classic, simple horror.
It's great stuff. It is around this part in the film that we realize that Carter has been abducting children to participate in some sort of sick experiment that he is likely putting on. We do find out later that it wasn't him that was putting it on. It was his father, his father who has faked his death to continue his experiments, which is like, what? So this is entirely unrelated to the whole, affair plot. We think, from the beginning of the movie that it's going to center around the affair, and it really isn't. It's not about that at all. The affair is almost incidental. And to see, Carter transform at this point, we're thinking, okay, clearly he's been collecting children for his own nefarious purposes, and Margot manages to escape, and we see the wig come into use. We don't see it get ripped off, but we do see Frances Sternhagen wake up after she has been attacked by Margot, and she reaches up and she touches her bald cap which has some wispy hairs, and she's like, "Oh my God, I need help."
Yep, help.
She's so great in this role. I almost wish there was more of her.
Well, I mean, there's plenty of her, but the majority of her scenes are just doling out the exposition of like, this is who Dr. Nix was and what he did and what the experiment is and yada, yada, yada. But because it's De Palma, he decides to do it, a giant, oneer walk and talk, and it's wonderfully constructed.
Yeah, they have this bit a couple times in that walk and talk where she keeps walking in the wrong direction and they have to redirect her.
Yeah,
it's very cute, very funny.
The final standoff, which is at this motel where Carter has been, I guess, keeping the kids. There's another great De Palma setup where it's like he's going to go from the top to the bottom of this hotel with this wonderful gliding camera that shows us what's happening on each floor of this hotel that's setting up our dominoes in play. And it's one of those where it's like, this is why he's considered one of the greats. Is as low key as this finale could go about, he makes it feel way more expensive than it should, simply by the way that he constructs how his camera is going to set you up for events to unfold. I think it's one of the reasons why he's so good at suspense stories, is because that's supposed to be baked in from the writing, it's supposed to be setting you up for things that will then pay off and reveal big later. And he's able to echo that same sentiment through the actual camera work.
Yes. And De Palma is great at taking something that could play low key and elevating it into like really high drama. I remember watching, it was a movie came out a few years ago. I think it was a movie called, I think it was called Passion. It had Rachel McAdams and Noomi Rapace in it. It was a remake, actually, a remake of a French movie.
Yeah.
But there's a scene where Noomi's character is very, very defeated in a parking garage by herself because I think somebody's wreaking havoc on her life. And they just elevate this moment to like such high operatic drama. And it's funny. And here, I think this climax and the way it plays out and the way that De Palma elevates it to like super operatic is both impressive and suspenseful, but also frankly hilarious. The old doctor leaning the daughter Amy over the railing, I forget what it is. It's like a tow truck or something beneath them that has some sort of like sharp contraption on the back that is parked perfectly below the walkway to the elevator, and so of course Amy's going to fall right on the sharp spike. It's like, oh my god.
Oh, it's even better than that. Is that this spike that's been set up from the dream that Jenny had about being speared? Then when we get to this whole sequence, these guys are they're backing the truck up, and this sundial. It's a sundial.
Oh, right.
That's sticking out, and the guy's like, "Watch it! You're gonna kill somebody with that sundial." Almost backs up into her windshield at first, and then what happens is Stephen Bauer, Jack, is running in the rain. Of course, it's raining. It had to be raining. As Amy is being dropped in slow motion down these, 3 stories, and he is going to jump and try and pick her up. But if he jumps, the sundial spear's right there. He's going to collide with it. And it's only in the ensuing tussle with Dr. Nix that his gun goes off and is able to shoot the tip of the sundial off just as Jack is leaping to grab Amy. If it had been a millisecond too late, he would have been impaled on the sundial.
Yeah. As if the rest of the movie wasn't preposterous enough, right?
But that's what I mean. Great. Like the movie
Sure.
earns that level of melodrama.
Right. The movie is not unaware that it's super preposterous and trashy and indulgent in these sort of just wrong-headed things. Like that's what makes it sort of close to exploitation. It's certainly pulp. I wouldn't say it crosses the line into being an exploitation film.
No, I mean, and that's De Palma. He's a pulp master. I mean, that's so much of the body of his work is unabashedly pulp, and I think it's one of the reasons he excels at. And for a lot of mainstream audiences, elevated what would be otherwise pulp sleaze into something that was, he saw the art in it.
Yeah. But he still doesn't, let people forget that it's really pulpy sleaze. Now, one of my favorite things that happens in the final minutes of this movie is that there is this incredible elevator ride with the wife, Jenny, and John Lithgow as Margot. And the way they hide Margot behind this paper bag full of God knows what. And then the camera moves down Margot's body. John Lithgow, by the way, is 6'4", so Margot is, of course, immense. The way the camera moves down his body to see John Lithgow's, Sasquatch feet is like, oh no, it's very good. But the horror of just him hiding behind that bag and knowing that like at some point that bag is going to come away and we're going to see something that kind of frightens us. And De Palma smartly holds off until the final shot.
Yes. We do not see Margot in the big climax. Then it seems that we get another catch up at the playground. Jenny's talking to her friends like, they haven't found Carter. I hope they find him. He needs help. But he's out there somewhere. And so then we get, as the two friends, Jenny and her friend are talking, the camera is slowly closing in on Amy. And we hear this creepy voice on the soundtrack, just Amy. And then a shot looking out into the woods near the playground. Amy runs off there. Jenny realizes she can't find her, starts running around. We start hearing the music box theme, which we should say, like the whole thing that kicks this off is this very, very movie version of a comedy of errors. in which Jenny buys both Carter and Jack a gift musical clock at this store, wraps them in the exact same wrapping, and
mixes them up,
and has realized like, oh no, I left, Carter's present with Jack and Jack's present with Carter. I wrote their names on big giant, envelopes.
Yeah.
But that's one of those things where it's like, okay, the movie knows this, like. This isn't stupid.
But it also seems like one of those silly stress nightmares that we have that are like totally mundane but really freak us out. Mm-hmm. Same idea. And you can tell like this is weighing on her, like the guilt and the anxiety of it is weighing on her in the first act of the film. But that final reveal of Margot is, I think, a movie like where the movie does cross over from ham into camp.
I mean, it's a big choice. Especially for it being your final image of the movie. Mm-hmm. It's one that I can easily see getting a laugh of a reaction, like because it's a high moment regardless of your qualitative read on it. It's a high moment that the movie's going out on, but it's a high moment either because wow, it set up this reveal in a really fun, smart, and rewarding way.
Yeah, just the staging of it is awesome.
I mean, yes, the staging is fantastic. Or it's like, oh my gosh, one of the absolute last things I'm going to see from this is a big reveal of John Lithgow in drag,
bright red lipstick. I think it's awesome.
Yeah, and a enormous wig. It's here's the thing though. From everything I say, Raising Cain, it's okay. Like I like it. This is probably the most I've ever liked it since I've seen it, and I do think that the new cut, rearranging things, has helped the movie. But I said to you, my take on it was that it's like a sentient Lifetime movie started keeping a dream journal.
Yeah, I mean that's a great description of it. I would absolutely watch this again, but it would be the theatrical cut, and mostly for comparison's sake.
Yeah,
I like this movie. I would rate it positively, but I find myself in a difficult position because I don't think a lot of our listeners would really like it. I can't really think of like many friends that I have that I would recommend this movie to. Unless they were like part of the Lithgow faithful, I'd be like, maybe skip Raising Cain. It's not for you.
I think for the Lithgow faithful, you have to see it just because it gives him so much of a spotlight. That alone is reason to recommend it. But this is a really off-kilter movie for De Palma. Mm-hmm. And, he's somebody who has certainly been able to benefit from doing off-kilter stuff, but I think his particular approach with this one, I mean, if you were just comparing it to the similar kind of suspense horror thrillers that he's done, I'd say this is probably closest to Sisters. That's another one that it's like, yeah, there's something weirder going on here in the psychology of the movie, other than just the basic mystery stuff. Like Raising Cain, it's odd. It's an unavoidably odd movie.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that's actually part of the reason it's maybe maintained some notoriety, certainly among De Palma's filmography.
Well, I think, critics would see a movie like this and recognize that it has a lot of interesting things going on. It has a lot of promise, but it's just downright confusing. And I don't think that's the kind of experience that most people go for when they want to sit down and watch a movie.
Well, especially I think this is especially true when you talk about the idea of suspense, thriller, mystery type stuff. If that's the framework you're working in, people want to be able to follow the red thread on your corkboard,
right?
Like that. And this is not necessarily a movie that is going to be in the process when you're doing it. It really does jump around a lot, not just in time, but in kind of it's but
through consciousnesses.
Yeah. So I agree with you where it's like, it's kind of a tough movie to recommend because it's like, it's weird. It is weird. When you think weird, people are thinking, well, it's going to be, art housey or experimental. It's like, no, it's just, it's weird. I will say it again. Deep Red is not my shelf pick, but I feel like that's a similar experience, to what I got from Raising Cain, where it's like, okay, I got what's going on, but the road to getting there was like walking through a bunch of MC Escher staircases.
Well, now that you mentioned shelf picks, I think now would be a great time to transition to that. Shelf is something that we do here at GenreVision that is a collaborative thing. We pull movies off our shelves to recommend or sometimes substitute for the movies we're talking about for a given episode. This is something you can participate in as well. If you go to GenreVision.com, you could submit your shelf picks for any movie we do in the comments section there, and we will read them on the next episode of the podcast. What are you pulling off the shelf for this strange, dreamlike De Palma movie?
Well, for Raising Cain, yeah, I mean, I this feels like a very baseline, basic thing to pick, but I think it's the more successful version of what kind of people want from this story. And it's M. Night Shyamalan's Split.
Good movie. Don't like the ending, but it is a good movie.
You don't like the ending?
No. The protagonist played by what's her nuts? Anya Taylor-Joy. She has to go back to live with her abusive family at the end of that movie, which sucks.
It does suck.
They did basically retcon that for the eventual sequel. But that's the one part of the movie I don't like. Otherwise, I think that's a brilliant movie.
Yeah, it's a bummer ending. Yeah, I mean, Split. I think when you talk about this being about Raising Cain being kind of pulp and not tipping over into exploitation, Split tips over into exploitation and knows it and embraces it
and is better for it. Yes,
exactly. And I think with the idea, for this kind of a concept, a character that has multiple personalities, which is such a movie wackadoo thing in the way that it's presented, this is like, well, then that's what we're gonna do. We're not gonna, tiptoe around how ridiculous this idea is, and we're gonna go for it, and then we're gonna go a step further when we reveal what's actually going on. And it's a similar thing. I think it allows James McAvoy to craft some of the best work I've ever seen from him.
It's fantastic work from him. Yeah. Why? I know why he wasn't nominated for many awards for this, but he deserved more awards than he was nominated for. Let's put it that way. This is an incredible series of performances from McAvoy that really, I think, cement him as one of the best performers of a generation.
Agreed. I think it's that good. And there are moments like that in Raising Cain, but because for the most part we're seeing them from Carter's perspective, it's different. It's different than seeing James McAvoy, who is appearing as these characters to other characters.
Yes. And for McAvoy's character, that whole process of, multiple personalities is all internal. And he exemplifies it so well with body language. There is a scene where one character transitions into another personality, and you see the change in body language, and we immediately know which character is taking the light. It's really brilliant work. Loved it.
It's up to, it's probably in my top 3 Shyamalan movies. Love
for sure.
Split.
Yeah.
So yeah. But what are you going to pull off the shelf for Raising Cain?
We did a movie last year that I was really surprised by. I think it's kind of a minor film from another acclaimed director of De Palma's generation, and that is The Hand, directed by Oliver Stone, starring Michael Caine. This is a movie where Michael Caine's character has his hand severed in the first act, and he then proceeds to have some sort of toxic masculinity mental breakdown about the evil hand following him. And there is another female psychologist or psychiatrist character in the end of this movie, played by Vivica Lindfors. It's just an awesome little cameo. So that reminded me of the Frances Sternhagen character in this movie. So if you've never seen The Hand, while it is a minor film, I still would recommend it if you want to see another great, crazy, hammy performance from Michael Caine. You could go pretty right by watching The Hand, I think. It's got some really fun effects in it too, like some very Evil Dead 2, like evil hand crawling around sort of stuff. There is an element in this movie as far as like questioning what is real and what isn't. Like, from his perspective, is the hand really following him? Is it not? Like, what's really happening in the story? But it gives you a more solid grasp on what the film's diegesis is. So I'd recommend it. There's some really fun commentary on the status of masculinity in the film that I think holds true to today. So The Hand, 1981, Oliver Stone.
All right. Let's do some currently consuming.
Nom 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 nom.
Travis, what's been on your plate?
there's a show that I'm sure nobody is watching because it's on Apple TV Plus. But it's The Servant. It's the Shyamalan show that he's directed a few episodes of, and sort of this serves as a kind of stylistic consultant. You know, like his whole style serves to set the tone and the rhythm for the direction of the series, and it's pretty good. I like that it is a half-hour format. I think that really serves the show well. It's tough to describe the plot of the show without spoiling a whole lot, because there's a really big development at the end of the first episode that is meant to be like, oh, okay, I guess that's where we're going. But the story is about a couple, and of course, because it's a Shyamalan joint, they live in Philadelphia. I believe the writer and the creator of the series, his name escapes me now, but he's English, and so there is some sort of stuff in the show that makes you feel like, oh, this was rewritten to take place in Philadelphia when Shyamalan signed on. So some of the dialogue feels very British English as well. So this couple they're wealthy. The woman is a newscaster, an on-camera broadcaster, and Toby Kebbell's character is a chef who developed recipes at home for high-end restaurants. So he's doing all sorts of like chefy, foodie stuff at home. At the beginning of the series, it is clear they have suffered a death of an infant, and the wife has suffered some kind of mental break. And what they're doing is they're using a doll, a lifelike baby, infant, newborn sized doll, to act as sort of a surrogate for the baby, so that the wife, doesn't have to deal with the horrible truth of the baby's death. And they're very evasive from the beginning as far as like not telling you certain details, like how'd the baby die. They hold off on that. And then because they're super wealthy, they live in this beautiful kind of like almost looks like a brownstone home in Philadelphia. They hire a nanny to help take care of the baby, further indulging in this woman's delusion. And the young woman that comes to stay with them is this seemingly kind of rural religious girl from rural Wisconsin, and she's immediately creepy and weird. She is the titular servant, or is she? We don't really know yet. But anyways, it just started its second season. It's coming out week after week on Apple TV. I watched the season premiere, and it'll be interesting to see how the show evolves, because it is genuinely weird and nasty, like mean-spirited, really kind of bold. I didn't expect this kind of thing to be on an Apple, an Apple service, which is often just so bright and colorful and nicey nice. But this is weird.
All right. Well, I'm also going to talk about a slightly weird show on a streaming service. The first two episodes of WandaVision are out as we record this. I've been very much looking forward to this, because as somebody who's not crazy about the MCU, it's nice to see the Marvel Cinematic Universe trying something really weird. And I gotta, first two episodes in, I gotta give them credit to sticking to the bit so far, which is this weird Scarlet Witch and Vision are living in some sitcom reality, and they don't quite know how they got here, or maybe Wanda does. It's very unclear kind of what's going on so far. And that's very exciting, particularly in the MCU, which wants to, show you the blueprint as much as it can. This is one where it has that same kind of the best aspect of Lost, where it's like, this is such a strange, totally disconnected, surreal thing to plop into the middle of this framework, that it must mean something, right? And at least with WandaVision, there seems to be a confidence of like, well, we know it's only going to be whatever, 6-9 episodes, whatever it is, that it is very likely that this is it. It's essentially just going to be a 9-episode movie or whatever. And that it's like, there's not going to be a WandaVision season 2. That's the vibe I get. And it's great to see Paul Bettany and Elizabeth Olsen, who I feel were always underutilized in those Marvel movies.
Yeah, I agree.
That the few times they got to stand out were very good. And this one, they get to be doing something very like Paul Bettany is on fire in this show, being asked to play the quirky sitcom lead of somebody, you know, like in the Dick Van Dyke Show or Bewitched. There's also the potential for interesting commentary here. It seems that the television is some kind of device that is connected to keeping them in whatever this reality is. And it's like for this being the first, this is like the first real MCU show. I know there's been those Netflix things and the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., but this is the first one that they're marketing it as you have to watch this.
Right.
Like this is necessary to watch to understand what we're going to do. And, you know, that's up for debate when this experiment continues. But the fact that their first TV show like that also seems to be making meta commentary about television as a prison, as a way to keep, persons, characters stuck in a warped reality they don't exactly understand. That's a bold thing for an MCU product to go for.
Yeah, it seemed to me that, I haven't seen it yet, but it seems to me like this is all about Scarlet Witch dealing with the grief of having lost Vision and, using TV as a way to trap emotions so that you don't have to deal with them. So we will see how that plays out. I haven't watched it yet. I don't plan on watching it in the near future. I will watch it whenever I next reactivate Disney Plus, which is, I don't know.
Well, I will say this, like right now, it's obviously going to be caught up in the throes of, ooh, what's this? A weird, unconnected, seemingly surreal thing happened. What's the explanation going to be about it? Like that's where everybody's at right now. And that's fine, but that is fleeting. Like we survived Lost. I know how this goes.
Yeah, we did.
There's a part of me, like for you, I'm like, honestly, wait until it's finished. Because then I think there will be a better picture of how people are going to read this and what they think it is. So far, I think it's very successful. It's wonderfully made and feels, very different, obviously, from the regular MCU.
Any notable directors on there?
I feel like, who was that? I can't remember right now because I feel like I saw some interview with one of the directors. But, so far the commitment to the bit of they're living these different sitcom fantasies. It's like, yeah, the majority of the episode is just going to be that, is them, these first two episodes is them really just playing out a particular sitcom beat. And as we talked about in the Harry and the Hendersons episode, you and I are not fans of multi-camera American sitcoms. And this actually had me laughing. Obviously they're riffing on very classic things and they're doing some wonderful twists with the characters and their abilities into these sitcom set. Like, the first episode is like, my boss is coming to dinner. Whoa!
Oh, interesting. The director is Matt Shackman, who's done a whole bunch of episodes of Always Sunny.
Yes. And so I'm very interested to see what WandaVision will be as a big picture thing, because right now it's also kind of the first MCU horror project. There is real dread going on in these sequences in the first two episodes. And it is surreal dread, like Wanda being at this meeting of, the prominent women in the neighborhood who are putting together a fundraiser. And all of a sudden a voice comes over the radio and it's like, Wanda, who's doing this to you, Wanda? And then the radio explodes. It's like, that's creepy. That's just like a creepy moment. I don't care so much about like the what's going on. It's just like, no, as a concept that plays out visually, it's, the term David Lynch, Lynchian has been kicked around with this show a bunch. And there's been I think a line drawn in the sand about it. And it's like, no, I think it's fair to say that's an influence here. But obviously there will be a much more concrete answer for what's going on. And the show is setting that up in the first two episodes. It's like, no. Like there is some man behind the curtain type being or organization that is doing this. You will get an answer.
Okay. Yeah. Because it has to be a concrete villain because it's a comic book story.
Right. The villain, I think, may end up being Scarlet Witch. I think that might be where they're going with it, in which they are setting up like, ooh, there's this evil organization and they're doing it to Wanda. But the real reveal will be like, yeah, we're doing it to protect people because she's, so powerful that she's the one doing this. Because there's mystery set up, like, who are all these other people in this weird neighborhood they've created? They don't remember who they were. You know, a character shows up and is like, yeah, I just got here, I think. Like, and it's like, oh, okay, like, how are these people getting here? The mystery of it is all like, okay, cool, but it is more the execution, and allowing Elizabeth Olsen and Paul Bettany to do something really different and stretch their legs and be the most endearing they've ever been in these MCU projects. So I'm on board. I'm really enjoying it. We'll see where it goes. Hopefully by the end of it, I think it'll be a nice little diversion in the MCU of like, oh, cool, they tried to do it. You know, eventually it will turn into an MCU product by the end. I'm convinced of that.
Yeah.
Where it'd be like, okay, yes, it is nice and safe and familiar, and we'll, you know, set up whatever has to be set up. But for the time being, I'm really enjoying the weirdness of it. So we'll see where that goes. Well, let's head over to the listener shelf picks for last week's episode on Harry and the Hendersons. JT went with Batteries Not Included, which I've never seen.
No, nor have I. Actually, I really couldn't even tell you what it was about.
I think it's like aliens that take over robots and like befriend an old couple. That's
like, you know what I do is I constantly mix this one up with, what is the name? Is it Weird Science as a robot movie, or is Weird Science?
No, Weird Science is where they make a woman.
I thought that was Mannequin.
Mannequin is when a mannequin comes to life.
There are about 6 movies that I have about, like, there's a compound movie that exists in my head that is Batteries Not Included. Oh, Short Circuit. That's the one I'm thinking of.
Oh, yeah.
Batteries Not Included, Short Circuit, Mannequin, and Weird Science are all the same movie to me.
So what you're saying is you've just scheduled a theme month for us.
Don't put that evil on me.
It's Travis's amalgamated movie month.
I used to think that one Wes Craven movie was part of that whole conglomerate.
Oh, Deadly Fred?
Yeah, but then I watched it and I was like, oh, that's something else. That's something else.
So we'll have to see. Yeah, we'll have to see if any of those make their way to GenreVision. But yeah, JT, Batteries Not Included. Mr. Milksteak went with Snow Beast, which is a 1977 TV movie starring Bo Svensson. And Willow Creek, which is the Bobcat Goldthwait Blair Witch Bigfoot movie. Yeah, it was okay.
Yeah.
And then Eric Fuchs went with My Neighbor Totoro, which is so sweet. Like, it's a good movie.
That is, I still have never seen that. I only watched Kiki's Delivery Service. I saw that for the first time last year. It was very good.
Yeah, Totoro's. I didn't grow up with Totoro like a lot of people, but I saw it later in life and really enjoyed it. Stephen Nesbella closes things out with Baby, Secret of the Lost Legend.
Jerry Goldsmith did the score for that movie, and it's a very good score. That's the only thing I know about it.
Yeah, I know it from title alone, and the fact that I feel like I know that it was a ginormous flop of a movie. But it's it says, according to Stephen Nesbella, it's a cryptid movie about 2 explorers running into baby Mokili Mbembe and its parents, which I just assumed it's like a Loch Ness movie.
That particular cryptid is like an Apatosaurus or some sort of, like 4-legged swamp dwelling. No, not a swimming dinosaur, a standing dinosaur.
Oh, okay.
Like a Brachiosaurus kind of thing.
Yeah, a lot of these have not seen. In fact, yeah, only 2 of these have I ever seen. So thank you for the shelf picks, everybody. Love seeing these. And we're going to wrap things up with our
Comment of the Week.
We actually had some really good comments, but we wanted to follow up on something that we put out there, which was if y'all wanted to hear us do a review of Godzilla vs. Kong. And we got replies from Eric Fuchs, Stephen Nesbella, and I believe one other. But yeah, it sounds like you guys want us to do Godzilla vs. Kong, so we're doing Godzilla vs. Kong.
Yep, it'll be out on HBO Max on March 26th. It'll also be quote-unquote in theaters on that day. Of course, Drew and I are not going to encourage anybody to go to a movie theater during a pandemic. So watch it on HBO Max. We found the Wonder Woman 84 HBO Max streaming experience to be good as far as streaming experiences go.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, we had our differences on the movie. Go listen to our episode. But the streaming experience of it, getting in 4K Dolby Atmos, it was great.
Mm-hmm.
So we The only thing is, and I think I said this when we put this out there, I feel like now I'm going to have to actually finish watching Godzilla King of the Monsters, which you did and I bailed on.
I can fill you in on the important stuff. Like I said in the last episode of the show, the only thing you need to know about the end of that movie is that Godzilla lives.
Yes, of course. That's all I need to know about Godzilla versus Kong is like, well, Godzilla's going to fight Kong, right? Okay, that's all I need to know.
Yeah, extraordinarily high concept movie. The highest concept.
Exactly. So we'll see if I get motivated enough to ever watch King of Monsters. But yeah, so we will be doing Godzilla vs. Kong in March, and we hope you'll tag along. And I guess that's going to wrap things up, and we will be back next week to conclude Lithgone month with Cliffhanger, which will be Travis's first watch. I'm very excited about that. I didn't know you hadn't seen Cliffhanger before.
Yeah, there's one Rennie Harlan I haven't seen. Well, there are several Rennie Harlan movies I haven't seen, but that's one of them. I'm excited to watch it with you, Drew.
I'm very excited. So we hope you'll be back next week to end Lithgone month, and we'll see how that experiment closes out. But as always, we want to thank you so much for listening. I'm Drew Dietsch.
I'm Travis Newton. Or am I?
And we'll see you next week.
Right here on GenreVision.